If you want to participate, contact me at ordinarywomenpodcast@gmail.com. I'm sure you have great projects to brag about. You can also follow me and message me on Instagram at Ordinary Women Podcast, on Twitter at Ordinary Women PC, or on Facebook on the page Ordinary Women. Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Ordinary Women. Hi Meg, how are you today?
Hi, Lucy. I'm great today. It's so nice to be speaking with you.
It's so nice to be speaking with you too. I'm really excited to have this chat. Can you start by giving us a quick introduction of yourself, please?
Yeah, absolutely. If it's all right with you, I will start with an introduction of Indigenous language in Te Reo Māori, which is the Indigenous language of New Zealand. So if that's okay with you, I'll share that.
Perfect. Yes, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Awesome. So, he uri ahau no tētai tokero, ko Ngāpuhi rawa ko Tainui ōku iwi, ko Ngai Tāwake rawa ko Ngāti Mahuta ōku hapu, ko Manaia te maunga e runei tōku ngākau, e noho anō hau ki Whangarei Heads ko Meg Smith tōku ingoa. Um, that is to share my tribal affiliations and my kind of grounding my place in the north of New Zealand, and to tell you that I live currently near a beautiful maunga, beautiful mountain called Manaia, and that's kind of the central point of our lives here in New Zealand. We share some of the connections we have to people and place when we introduce ourselves in Māori, because that's the way that we are tied together. And one of the things that I've been learning on my own sort of reconnection journey to the Māori culture, because my heritage is both Māori and we would call it Pākehā, but that's a lovely mix of European. Um, and we talk about those ties to connection to place, because I love this phrasing of we don't own the land doesn't belong to us, we belong to the land. And so by sharing where we're from when we're in a context of people, they can kind of understand who we are and what we care about by those connections.
This is so cool. I love that. I never thought of, I don't know, of doing that or of it that way. That's super, super cool.
I had the extreme privilege of being part of the first delegation of entirely Wahine Māori, so entirely Māori women representatives of New Zealand. We were sent off as a delegation of the government to Paris, Dublin, and London earlier this year in connection or celebration of the new free trade agreements between New Zealand and the EU, and New Zealand and the UK. And we would share sort of an introduction in that way. And yeah, a lot of people would say, I've never heard of that before. I never talk about it. And in fact, I think in an increasingly global world, we would never ask someone, just straight out, where are you from and what is your heritage? But because we share it sort of openly, it was amazing the conversations it opened up for people to be able to share their own background and what that means for them and how it sort of shapes their lives. So it's a unique concept to our culture, but I've loved seeing how by sharing it, it encourages other people to talk about how their heritage is kind of shaping the way they move through the world.
This is so interesting. I love it. And yeah, starting that conversation is so interesting. I studied languages and intercultural management and intercultural studies. And so we always talk about, well, like the point of these studies is to talk about how different cultures interact with each other. So it's also super interesting in that sense because we studied, in my master's, we did it a lot in the working environment, but I think it can apply to any other environment where you can very much adapt your communication or understand whoever you're speaking with if you understand where they're from. So it's really interesting. And yeah, I love also that we belong to the land. The land doesn't belong to us. It's it's really beautiful, really great concept. I love it.
I love that you studied that cultural connection, because I feel like it's increasingly important. It honors each other's differences rather than trying to maybe erase them or pretend that they don't exist.
Yes, completely, absolutely agree. Especially as you just said, in a more and more global world. Yeah, that was partly the subject of my master thesis. So I could talk about this all day long, but we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about you. And obviously, on this podcast, we talk a lot about what it's like to be a woman. So I'd like to start by asking, was there a moment or an event when you realized that you are a woman?
I love this question because I have thought about it a lot and I keep coming back to the moment when I got my period, which feels a bit cliche, but it's just such a visceral memory for me. I can remember that I was not particularly young, but I suppose I was young. I was nearly 12. I was 11, turning 12. And earlier that year, there'd been a lot of like progressive, I suppose, education in my school about it. And I just had always felt older than my age. So I was like ready. I was like, this is the mark of being more mature and growing up. And I was really ready to embrace it. And, there's always that curiosity about what it would feel like and how I would be different. And I can remember the moment that I found out that I got my first period because I was in a supermarket and I didn't know what it would be like. And I can very clearly define it in this before and after, but it's not quite the feeling I thought I would have. It was the feeling of like, I wanted this so bad. I'm like, oh, this is like a whole lot of admin and like this is it for the rest of my life. And I can remember really feeling like, why did I want this so bad? And then going on that journey. And I think recently, though, I've been talking to more people and listening to more people about embracing, our cycles and learning to understand our energies and work with our energy rather than against it, and recognizing that it will actually have a big impact on our lives as women. And so being curious about what it means for you individually and also reframing it. I definitely think that from that age of 11, nearly 12, I experienced my period as a bit of a burden, like I said, an administrative thing to think about, physically not that comfortable, felt a bit probably some shame around it and feeling like it was a bit, dirty and gross as we often are conditioned to feel. And even as like I'm nearly 35 and it's only this year that I've really been able to start to reframe that. And I think part of that journey has been helped by switching to things like a menstrual disc instead of tampons and really like I don't know, experiencing it in a more present way in my body and my mind and really reframing it because I have a daughter and I don't want her to experience the shame that I did around that, which I think was just societal and shows the evolution that we've had. I can remember my mum telling me that even though she grew up in a family with 6 sisters, when she got her period, she was kind of blindsided by it because no one talked about it. And she's like, I must have been able to ask one of my sisters, what to do or anything, but she was like, it was just not talked about at all. And I love that I've had a sort of an evolved experience of that, and I hope that my daughter will have an even more evolved experience of that. And my son, to be honest, of understanding that it's like normal and that people who menstruate in his life will need support during that time.
Wow, this is so interesting. There's so many learnings, and yeah, it's so great that there's more and more knowledge accessible to everyone nowadays. Like, I feel that we're talking a lot more about all of this.
It's still an uncomfortable topic, right? A little bit, even for me, is on this journey of I think I wouldn't even necessarily say I'm embracing it quite yet. I'm evolving to not being grossed out by it. Um, so it's a comfort level thing. But even if like whatever level you're at, you can get a little bit more comfortable. I feel like, for my experience anyway, it's helped. And being curious about different practices or rituals or things that make women feel empowered rather than ashamed and needing to sort of solve a problem by themselves. I'm embracing that.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, especially since about half of the world has experienced or will experience at some point having their period, it's definitely something that's worth knowing.
Right?
And I don't know if you have the same experience, but I was also, taught about same age, about 12 as well in school. We would have, how, I don't know, how to use a pad or a tampon. Back then, cups and discs were not really a thing. We talk about in biology, like what happens, your uterus, blah, blah, blah. But no one ever told us about hormonally what happens and like throughout your cycle, and that it's not just that 1 week that you bleed and then you have 3 weeks or whatever, which also, again, like 28 weeks is not, it's just an average, but obviously every person who menstruates has a different cycle. But it's so interesting. I feel that now more and more we hear about what's around the bleeding time, kind of, which is great. I hope the next generation will be even more in touch with their whole cycle. But it's again, considering that about half of the world will or have had their period at some point, I don't know. It just, I was going to say fascinating,
I
annoying that we don't know more
Annoying,
about
right?
the entire cycle.
I heard this, I think it was on Mama Dr. Jones. She's fabulous. If you are on Instagram or YouTube, she's a gynecologist who shares content about basically reproduction, right? And the female reproductive system. And I think it was on her channel. I saw this comment that we know as much today about the female reproductive system as the Victorians knew about the human brain. And I was just like, "That's so annoying," as you said. Like, it
What?
just demonstrates the under-resourced or underfunding that we've experienced in this space in terms of research and understanding more about it. Yeah, but this is again why, like, equity and access of more women into these scientific and research roles is because it's those women who are getting into those places and going, "I'm gonna research this," or, "I'm gonna explore this." Or actually even one of the wahine, one of the women that was on the delegation with me, Michelle Williams, she's working on an app called Ehua, which is an app to track your cycle. It has also information there alongside the lunar calendar, or in Maori we call it the maramataka, which is this body of knowledge around there is different times when your energy will be like ready for different things, right? Sometimes it's the
Yeah.
time to rest, and sometimes it's the time to be super productive. And you don't even really need to try. You're just in this real state of productivity or creativity. And yeah, the body of knowledge is growing. But when I heard that comparison to what the Victorians thought about our brains and how we think, I just thought, oh man, there's so much more to know. There's so much more to explore. And so I'm not in the scientific field, but it makes me go, okay, what is my role personally to understand my own body better? And how does that help me doing what I need to do?
Yeah, definitely. I actually am tracking my cycle a lot more and I'm using it also to plan like whatever I plan. Like I know that as
Yeah.
a lot of people the week before and the week of my period I have zero energy. So usually I try to plan a little bit less. Whereas the 2 weeks, sort of the 2 other weeks, I'm like, I have so much energy and then it's like it's fine. But it's I don't know, I'm a bit again, annoyed or like not enraged. That's like, but
Yeah.
I'm a bit angry that, I had to wait to be 25 years old to know that. That's 10 years of menstruating and not doing it just because nobody told me because nobody cares. You know what I mean? So annoying.
Yeah. Yeah, and that whole flip of like the Monday to Friday is when we're going to do our best work and we're most productive because that's the way the world works, instead of going like, okay, well,
Yes.
what would it actually look like if you were able to line it up with your energy? And I just wanted to say too about what you made about education and how if we were to evolve that curriculum and give that knowledge to people when they start menstruating, there's also a beautiful knowledge that I think gets missed and how that connects through to fertility. And of course, when you're a teenager, the last thing most people want is to get pregnant. But what I'm noticing, because I'm serve as a trustee on the board of Fertility New Zealand, and that is an organization that helps basically walks alongside people facing infertility challenges. And the people that I work with, and myself included, and the consumers that we serve, they say over and over again that they just didn't know. They weren't aware of some of the impacts of age or physical conditions or social conditions, even around that could affect their ability to have a baby when they want to. And so, if we can give that knowledge earlier, then people can be more empowered and be making choices that ensure that they can have a family when they want to, which I don't know. I did say that to someone recently, and they were like, "Yeah, but when you're a teenager, you just, the last thing you would do is think about it." But I think it also there's a way to give a bit of information or even a pathway to say, "Hey, this is something you should know," like you said, around like the way your hormones work. And if you want more information, these are the paths that you would go, or these are the ages that people would wish they had started to think about it.
Yeah, completely. And also, I don't. I agree with that person in that, yeah, of course, like when you're 15, I mean, I do think most people do not want to have a baby, but I don't think it's a, I don't know. It's still a good thing to hear about it, I feel. I mean, I'm a big, advocate for knowing always about everything. Made it my job,
Yeah.
literally. But yeah, I felt that it's still really good to teach about that because then, when you actually want to get pregnant, you're like, or like, even if, I don't know, at like 23, you're starting to think, okay, maybe in 5 years, I'll start actually thinking about that. You're still much more in control if you've already heard about it and be able to search about it. Whereas if you don't know it even exists, you can't even, you know what I mean? So yeah,
I do
but
know what
that's
you
an
mean.
interesting
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, that whole thing of like you can't know or be prepared for things that you just have no idea. And there, I
Yeah.
mean, that's the body of knowledge of the world, so maybe going a bit big, but like you've already pointed out, like this is something that almost half of the world are experiencing or concerned with. Do a bit more in this space, I think.
Yeah. 100%. That's a very, yeah, very interesting conversation. Thank you so much for sharing.
And not really where I thought that was going to go, but I enjoyed it.
No, same. I love it. But also, I want to keep on with my questions because there's so much more that I want to know about you. But did you grow up with any women role model?
Yeah, so when I was about, it was actually that same year when I was 11, I entered a short story competition and I ended up becoming a finalist for the national sort of competition. And at that ceremony, we were given, it was like, I felt like Christmas to me because the sponsor was Nestle. So there was like a big hamper of Nestle treats and chocolates and stuff. And then you also got this massive stack of books. They were all by New Zealand authors. And so I just was like, there's this picture and I've just looked like I've had all my Christmases come at once. And the person who was, shaking hands and handing out those awards was Helen Clark, who was the first female prime minister that was voted in New Zealand. And my family, it's funny, your politics often come from your family, right? So my family's politics were not aligned with her party, but she was this figure in my life that I just looked up to. And in hindsight, I look back and I love this. She was prime minister for 9 years. She served 3 terms. And that was really most of my like teenage years. And so just because that's how it was, I kind of always assumed that was just quite normal. That having, your prime minister or the leader of your country be a woman. It didn't really hit me until I was coming into my 20s and sort of hitting the workplace and becoming a bit more engaged in politics and understanding as a woman moving through the world the gender roles that are kind of put on us. It made me realize how impactful and powerful it was to live with that example of what a woman can do in terms of the levels of leadership they can go to. And she does a great TED talk. I'll share the link in case anyone wants to watch it. But it's all about the value or the importance of having female leaders in positions to make decisions because what studies have shown is that women leaders are much more likely to make policy decisions that benefit everybody. And I think we need more of that all the time, right?
Yeah, that's so interesting. I will take you on that offer of sharing the link because I really want to watch it now. And I will put it in the show notes as always for everyone else who wants to see it. That's super interesting. Yeah, and I wish a few more American people would have seen this before they voted a few weeks ago.
Right. It's also really interesting for me. I think having had that experience in that journey, and then I went and worked in Australia while Julia Gillard was, or maybe she just left office. And then obviously there's lately the treatment of Kamala Harris by media. I find it's made me think quite critically about reactions to women in leadership, right? And try to decode why is it that both men and women react in such a strong way. It's not about policy, it's about what they're wearing, it's about how they show up and all these criticisms that come about the kind of person they are derived from whether they're laughing too much or not enough or it's so unfair and I will use the word like enraged there. Like it's enraging, but it's a system that is having to be redefined. So I have so much respect for women, regardless of whether my politics align with theirs. I have so much respect for women that stand up and take all of that vitriol, which is just now a given for female politicians, because they see that they can have an impact and they believe in being part of that change. And I honestly think that we need to do more to protect women in those positions, because though I can see why people would stop standing up and put it and exposing yourself to that.
Yeah, completely, definitely. Yeah, I think enraging is the word, as you said, because it's,
Yeah.
yeah, just so unfair.
And people will capitalize on it, right? Or push on that button. We have this incredible member of parliament, Hana Rafferty, or Hana Maipi Rafferty, who you might have seen the video of her doing a haka in our parliament recently. She is the youngest member of parliament New Zealand's had since, I think, like the 1800s or something. Um, During her campaign, though, like, she had home invasions, people threatening her life. If you look at the comments of the videos that go viral about her, there's consistently people just like coming for her, not for her politics, for her as a young person and as a female. And she has to deal with that in a way that male politicians do not have to. And I'm like, there should be protections better than there are. And instead, she has to rely on sort of her own mana, her own internal strength, the strength of her whānau, the people around her, to get her through that. And again, if I'm thinking of myself as a mother, if my daughter came to me and said, I want to do that, I'd be personally on an individual level scared for her. And so, how can we as a society make it more equal or more equitable so that we can have people in those roles that, are the people we want to be making those decisions and advocating for us?
Yeah, completely. What do we do collectively, right? That's, yeah, so
Yeah.
many great questions today.
We could solve all
um,
the problems of the world, Lucy. I feel like we've got it, you and me.
I know, right? Like, shall we just stop ordinary women and just be like, I don't know, make the
Ready
world
to take over the
great again?
world.
I wish. But yeah, really interesting role models. And I'm sure that some of them are still role models today. Or who are your role models today?
Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that ahead of time, but I would definitely say that Hannah is a role model for me today. A way that, it's such a good example of standing up for your convictions because you see the role that you can play in the collective, not because she's got an ego that says, I want to stand up and be important. You quite often, if you watch her interviews, will see her say that she didn't want this role, she was placed in this role. And I think that's, really admirable. I've been learning about governance and I've taken on a couple of board roles and really just been trying to learn from people who have held governance roles about what good governance looks like. And one of the things that has struck me is that it's not a role to take on if you are doing it for your ego, because it's not, you won't get the thanks for that would satisfy that. Most people in governance are doing it because they have the skill set and they want to serve. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about big corporations, that may be different, but in the sort of nonprofit space, I kept hearing a phrase from one of the chairs of one of the boards I'm on, and she's great. She says, if you can, you should. So if you have the capability and the time to hold those roles, you should, because we need people who are trying to serve a community bigger than just serving their own interests.
Wow, that's so, yeah, I love that. If you can, you should. Kind of coming back to what you were saying earlier about, having women in leadership who will think of the interest of the community and not just personal interest.
Yes, or yeah, not just people that look like you, right? So the point that I think Helen makes in that TED talk is that one of the policies that had never even sort of been conceived of or tabled until it was tabled by her as a female was parental leave. And the way that a policy like giving paid parental leave in New Zealand anyway, it can be shared across both parents. It doesn't have to just be the mother or the birthing parent. And she said a policy like that impacts everyone and improves it for everyone. She said, but it had never even kind of come up when it wasn't brought up by a woman.
That's yeah. This reminds me of a I don't know what type of content it was on whichever social media that I saw the other day of a basically a man saying like, oh, why would men need also obviously very cis-centered type of language, but saying something like, why would men need a parental leave when all the baby does is being at a woman's breast, basically something like that, and it.
Oh my God.
Just like speechless by these. I'm just like, ah, really? Like,
I
yeah,
You can tell he's never spent any time looking after a child. Um, and
literally.
and most people, haven't to a point, but I had a lot of time because my husband and I had fertility challenges. So we had a lot of time to think about how we wanted to parent together. And one of the things I was really clear on is like, I want to do it with a partner. I don't want to just do it on my own because I could see how I would really struggle. I would find it really enraging, probably is the word again. So it was one of the things that I had time to think about and we had time to talk about. And my experience has been made so much richer because he was hands-on and engaged. And in fact, actually, I think he might have been the first of us to like have our baby overnight on his own. Like because we just both happened to be here. He was working from home and that for me has made me realize like it was still a really hard thing to become a parent, even with a very engaged partner, and how much harder it must be for women who are unfortunately with someone who has that attitude, where they're just carrying so much and they're carrying a burden that their partner will never care to understand. And so, therefore, that cycle of frustration around I'm doing all this work, but I know that the person that I'm doing this with thinks I'm just lying around all day when in fact you're the most physically and mentally exhausted that you've ever been. I now understand why they use sleep deprivation as a form of torture. You just start to lose your mind after a while, and that's something that you really, yeah. I mean, some people don't need to experience it to empathize with it, but it sounds like that guy does need to experience it. Well, and also back to that point about what's good for everybody, right? Like, because I talk about how it impacted my experience, but he could talk and does talk about how it's impacted his experience to be as often called on as I am as and out by our kids. They'll go to him just as often, sometimes more often, depending on the day, if they're hurt or if they need something. And that relationship and that closeness is one of the byproducts of being a really engaged and present partner. And I will say too that my personal journey with it was realizing that I really struggle to ask for help. Um, as I think
Yeah.
often we do as women because we're conditioned that way, right? And so having to learn and relearn and be able to articulate or trust. It's not even about finding the perfect words we've realized over time, but to be able to really kind of clearly establish that trust over time of like, we're on the same team. It's not a burden for me to ask him to help. And he wants to help. He's on my team. He wants me to be well. He wants our kids to be well. So anything that serves that goal, he's like right there, yeah, sign me up. So, and that's actually, I think we started working together. I decided not to go back to my job at Google. I'd been with Google for about a decade actually across different, we lived in Australia and the UK and we are home in New Zealand when we had our babies. And I decided not to go back after my second maternity leave because I sort of saw this opportunity to start working with him a bit more. And I think our ability to work together really well has actually been strengthened by the lessons we had to learn about communication as parents of babies. So it's funny, like, I think we are working together much better than if we hadn't had to sort of go through the fire of sleep deprivation and playing to each other's strengths and divide and conquer and like you do this, I'll do this, and all of that stuff has actually prepared us to be really good business partners.
That's yeah, that's really great. Like it sounds like you had a great experience on that, which is really cool. And also congratulations, because yeah, I bet if you had fertility issues, it must have been a great, like amazing experience to at least have been able to
Oh,
have your two children. So congratulations.
thank you. Every single day we look at each other and we go, we are so lucky. And the amazing thing is that when you're on a fertility journey, you get so focused on getting pregnant. I wasn't even focused on having a baby. I just felt like getting pregnant was so far out of reach that it's almost been this amazing constant discovery of like, then you fall in love with this baby, but then the baby is growing and changing all the time. And I just think growth and development, I like watching it on kids is just, yeah, made me appreciate so much more. And you kind of think just when you think you know them, they'll learn something new and surprise and delight you in a new way. So yeah, I definitely never take it for granted, given our journey to get here.
Yeah, I can imagine that's so special. Great. And if I remember correctly, you were going to talk about that business that you have with your husband in the like project kind of part. Is that correct?
Yeah, I love that we've kind of gone like right to like governance and leading countries in the world, and I've forgotten to talk about what I was here to talk about.
It's so
Um,
interesting. I'm also very guilty of not driving the conversation towards that part, but it was just so interesting.
yeah. Yeah, no, I love it. Yeah, so when I left Google, I had to learn how to learn again. I think I'd been in a corporate space for so long where I think you're constantly learning on the job, but you also have required trainings and you kind of, I remember feeling so bombarded with information. My husband's one of his superpowers is he's a great learner. Like if you ever have the chance, you should do Clifton Strengths Finder to understand what you're good at and sort of structure your career around what you're good at and doing more of. And his is learner. And when I was in my corporate mindset, he would like be like, I've learned this thing, or you should be curious about this thing. And I'm just like, I can remember shutting it down and being like, no, I just have no more capacity for that. But when I left, I started to kind of rekindle my love for learning. And I've learned so much about myself, but also I've realized it's like a muscle. The more you work it, your curiosity and you work, you're sort of opening your brain up to thinking in a different way, the better it gets. So when I left, and I think even, a year ago when I was like, okay, I'm going to leave Google and I'm going to, and I said what we were going to do in our business, what I really love is a year later, a bit more than a year later, the core foundation is the same. It's around helping people develop their AI literacy so that they can work it into whatever career they're working on, right? So it's a big piece of work. That hasn't changed. But what has changed is sort of the ways in which I thought we would do that versus the ways in which we are doing that, and who we're serving has been like a bit of a 12-month project. I'm sure we'll always be evolving it. But yeah, so we do learning programs and really look at how can we help individuals change their mindsets when it comes to interacting with technology and embracing the possibilities when it comes to new technologies like AI, tying that together with the knowledge that you might already have in your area of expertise to make yourself someone who adds a whole bunch of value in your professional life so that your career prospects are increasing rather than, I think a lot of people are feeling at the moment this fear of becoming irrelevant, of their skill set becoming irrelevant. And the antidote to that, from what I've seen, is to be able to enable yourself with tech skills. And those skills need to be things that will be true even as our technology changes. And that's kind of the piece of work that I've focused on over the last 12 months. And we have a few different programs. One of them is quite specific or for a niche of people working in Microsoft business applications. So that's Microsoft's suite of tools that help organizations run. So the biggest one they have is Dynamics, but they also have Power Platform. So we help people who are working in that space understand where they want to take their career path, understand the opportunities, and help them, work on things like personal brand and communication and becoming a consultant that is so in demand that they're always sort of have as much work as they want to have. So that program is called the 90-Day Mentoring Challenge. And it's been so awesome to get to meet people. We do a live every fortnight, and I was chatting to some people last night, and the different ways in which people are using AI to learn is just awesome. Learn languages and practice for exams. Yeah, I find it has been rewarding to create the program, but more than anything, to learn from the people on it.
That's so cool. That's so interesting. Yeah, that really reminds me of one thing my manager always says, which is that ideally, if you do your job really, really well, you should work towards making yourself redundant. And I love that this is
Yeah.
like kind of like where you're helping everyone doing that basically. And like, Yeah, how do you help people working with and not against technology?
Yeah, because it feels counterintuitive to yeah, make you to be so helpful that you're no longer required. But what I've found is that actually makes you like, you'll never want for work if that's the way that you work because you get a reputation as the problem solver or the person who they want on that. And what we encourage and help people do is package up the stories that they can tell and the value they can demonstrate, whether that's in an interview or one of the big trends we're seeing, especially in tech, is this idea of keeping a portfolio of your work, of your speaking engagements, of the projects you've worked on, of the impact of those projects and having that maybe on a website that is something you own so that that's a way to future proof, make it so that you would never have a problem getting a job. And actually the people that have been doing that for a while, we're seeing that they are often choosing to become freelancers. And that's a trend I think we'll see more and more as AI is embedded more and more into what we do everywhere. This kind of future where, you have your skill set or you have the value that you can add, but you might be working for multiple different companies at a time to deliver that value. And in order to stand out in a crowded marketplace, having that portfolio or I think the portfolio does two things. One's it's somewhere to send people and they can go, whoa, I had no idea Lucy had all these experiences. I didn't realize she worked on that thing. I've worked for that company. Again, making those connections because that's how our brains are wired. And we want to be with people who are like us. So finding a way that we're the same is one thing that portfolio enables. But the other thing it does is if you've had to go and write your stories or quantify the kind of wins that you've had, it means that when you're talking to someone, they will just eloquently roll off your tongue a bit easier rather than that thing that I think is so natural when people say, what do you do? Or your mind kind of goes blank and you're like, oh, I don't know, I don't really do anything. I've never really done anything. Whereas having taken the time to reflect and go, hey, actually, on that project, I did this, which had the impact of this. And now I'm able to whatever it might be, take that forward. And I think we underestimate how important it is to have those stories ready to just share when you get the opportunity, things that people remember, and then they will get you the job or give you an introduction that might get you your next job.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Like career storytelling almost. It's yeah,
Yeah,
so interesting.
yeah, like one of the things I got to do when I was at Google in New Zealand, I'd just sort of come home and there was a project starting to build the first permanent Google office in New Zealand. The office that had been used before were kind of more temporary e-suite type offices. And to be building the first one, I got the chance to co-lead the committee of Googlers, of people who work at Google who were tasked with making sure the office represented the local culture. And it was such a great experience in my career because it was nothing sort of to do with what I was doing day to day, but I got to gain so many skills on that, collaborating with people in different locations, translating what our local team, which was predominantly expats, predominantly people from not from New Zealand, but who had quite a strong idea of having come to New Zealand where the office needed to reflect culture. And the big one that came out overwhelmingly in the survey was we need to reflect inclusion and respect for the Maori culture, but avoid cultural appropriation and do it in a way that is really genuine. And so I got to work with our architecture firm as well as we engaged with the local cultural leaders and consultants when it came to what does that look like and how do we do that in a way that is not just commissioning a piece of art that would hang in the entranceway. How do we actually infuse it into the whole design and of the sort of the global real estate team to explore that. And I spent 6 weeks, I think 1 hour a week talking about what does it look like and how do we show that. And it was such a great lesson for me because I think I'd show up to these meetings with my Western brain of like, right, we're here for a meeting, we have an agenda, someone's we're going to discuss, and then there'll be an action at the end of the meeting. And that's not how these meetings ran because we were trying to figure out a problem that was quite sort of abstract, we talked about whakapapa, those connections to land and place, and we talked about the role of Google as an American company coming to New Zealand, the ideas and the connections between Aotearoa New Zealand and Google as a sort of global entity. And we listened and learned about stories about the specific area where the office is being based. And it was a really formative experience for me because it was the first time I'd really been able to be Māori at work. I think I'd always, in my work life had not really thought there was a space for that. But yeah, it's something that I sort of take with me into, now any work or projects that I do, I've got a much higher comfort level with ambiguity and recognizing that if you create the space to listen, even if you don't know what the action or the outcome is, you might be surprised at where you end up. So I'm glad I had that experience, and it's I think a good example of why when you are given an opportunity that feels maybe irrelevant or you can't quite see how it maps to what you're doing or where you want to go, if you can be curious about it, you might find that you can pick up a skill that will be something that you end up, almost forming your career around.
Yeah, oh, I love that story. This is so cool. And this project sounds so incredible and yeah, amazing to have worked on. And yeah, I definitely agree. I'm like super curious and I always end up doing things that 5 minutes before I wouldn't even have thought of just because I've been like a bit noisy on something and then decided that I wanted to know. But in the end,
I
it's
love
always
that.
so cool to pick up on these things. And so, why did you start this company working together, etc.? Why did you start helping people
Yeah.
with AI?
Our company's called Clover Base, and I really love the symbolism of clover as being a symbol of luck and good fortune. And that is a big reason why we started our company because I feel like it's luck and good fortune that has landed me in a job that has worked in tech at a time when it's been becoming so core to what we do. And also recognizing that a career in tech is available to people who don't necessarily have the traditional skills, right? Like you don't have to have gone to university. You don't have to, and actually, it's a benefit if you don't sort of think in the same way that everyone else thinks. So we really are all about trying to share that luck and give people pathways and empowerment around careers in tech and what that can mean if they can really be encouraged to do what they do well or follow their interests and add tech to it and go that much further.
That's so interesting. That's so cool. I love it so much. Obviously, I'll put everything in the show notes, like your website and everything, so everyone can go satisfies their curiosity as I'm about to do after this call.
That's
That's
awesome.
super cool. I love it. And how did you do it?
So I think I am very lucky that we had set up the company when I'd got a job with Google in London and Mark was deciding what he was going to do and he decided not to he decided to set up the company and sort of contract he had an opportunity to become a supplier to Microsoft in Redmond in their head office to deliver some training programs for them, and that was really when we set up the all the legal entity and a whole bunch of foundational work. And then, so it meant that years later, it was about 5 years later, when I was in this position to decide where did I want to take my career next, a whole bunch of the legal stuff was already set up, and that made it a lot easier. I have a lot of empathy. Oh, first of all, New Zealand is a really easy place to do business. I think you can incorporate a company in the space of like an hour or two online. Like, um, so we're
Wow.
fortunate in that sense. But there was a whole bunch of foundation that I
That's,
got
yeah.
to step into. Yeah, like, our accounting setup and, websites and a whole bunch of stuff was already done. One of the things I will say is that even with that, there's a lot of effort you need to do to set up a business that is not necessarily related to the reason that you've set up that business. So even, with all of that foundation, you're still spending a lot of time in those early days in like process, understanding, yeah, who you want to serve, understanding your different pieces of tech that need to work together to bring the delivery of that service to life. I like the analogy of a jet engine. It spends a lot of energy before it even gets off the ground. So that kind of analogy sort of sustained me in those early days when it was feeling like, oh gosh, all we're doing is learning this tool or learning Squarespace or getting into like, another piece of technology to enable us to do the thing that we actually want to do. Yeah, I had that analogy in my head of like this is the build up, the energy expended to get off the ground. And I think the other thing that I kept front of mind when it felt overwhelming was like just take the next best step. That if you can keep doing that, and then you'll be moving forward, even if you're evolving as you go.
Yeah, definitely. It's so funny that I think so many of us are like, right, I need to know everything that I'm gonna do, but then that never works in real life. But then you still do it the next time, and you'll have to like make an actual effort to remember that you need to do one thing at a time. That's very cool
Yeah,
that you managed to do that.
the power of momentum is massive. That it's much easier to change directions when you're already moving than to sort of sit still and go, I'm just going to get it right first time.
Yeah, completely. Also because it's very rare to get anything right the first time you do anything at all.
Right? Why do we expect that of ourselves?
Literally, it's like quite impossible.
Yeah.
Thank you so, so much for sharing. And why are you proud of yourself with this?
I'm proud of it for the people whose lives it's impacted. We get incredible feedback from, there's about 1,200 people from 70 different countries so far that have done our 90-day mentoring challenge. And the feedback we've heard about, it's given them the push to get that job or move countries or start their own thing. We got a beautiful letter written and sent to us, physically sent to us from a guy on Ireland who talked about the impact of the community that we've built on his family and his job. And so for me, that sense of pride is a collective sense. It's that whole thing of if you can, you should, and this is something we can do for people that will help them. And so just keeping that purpose really centered of giving to other people what we've been really fortunate to experience. So I'm proud of it for that. But I'm also proud of it for me and the belief that I now have in what I'm capable of because of taking lots of those steps. It now sort of I have these little proof points that when I have my next ambitious goal, I can go, okay, well, I've not done that big thing before, but I have done, you know, crafted a brand story, whatever, the different component pieces of it. And I've actually seen on this journey in the last year that so much of what I'm able to do now has been built on skills that I attained over my career that felt irrelevant at the time, but have actually turned out to be quite helpful. So it's given me a better or more open mindset about I might not understand quite why this thing is going to be important right now, but I'm going to do it and throw everything at it because in the future it may end up being the exact skill set or the exact connection I need to achieve my big ambitions.
That's amazing. And yeah, definitely so much to be proud of. I love this. Thank you so, so much for being on this podcast today, for sharing these parts of your story with us, with me and everyone who's listening.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so encouraging to hear the stories that you share of other women. And so, yeah, it's an absolute privilege.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's an absolute privilege and honor to have you here today. There is a tradition on this podcast that the guest always gets the very last word, so the mic is yours.
The last word, I think, for me is a message for everyone that we've talked about the role of women and the opportunities for women. But I think that when we talk about these things, it's important to include everyone because men and women together, and all people, however you identify, we can go so much further than if we are divided. So, my last word I'll give you is a word called kotahitanga, which means unity and oneness. And I think that's what I hope for, and that's what I strive for.